Welcome to our deep dive into the psychology of money. It's exciting. We've got a fascinating mix of material for this one. Excerpts from Morgan Housel's book, a couple of interviews with some financial experts. And you know what the common thread is?
Let me guess.
It's not about picking the right stocks. It's about how our brains work when it comes to money.
It is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, we can spend years and years, learning all about these fancy investment strategies. But if we don't get the psychology, we're missing a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, exactly. You're trying to make smart decisions about your future, but our brains are just running on this ancient wiring, right? Programmed for like instant gratification, risk aversion. It's almost like trying to run a marathon with a toddler clinging to your leg.
That's a great analogy. And one of the big takeaways that I see from the sources you gave me is that we're often not even aware of these mental biases. Like take hindsight bias, for example.
Yeah, what is that?
Hindsight bias is that feeling that, looking back, everything just seems so obvious. Like, of course the dot-com bubble burst. Anybody could have seen that coming. But at the time, everybody was so swept up in the frenzy. It's really hard to see your own blind spots when you're in the middle of it.
That's so relatable. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've looked back on some financial decisions and thought, what was I thinking? Is that why so many people, I mean, even when they kind of know what they should be doing, they struggle to actually stick with their plans?
Absolutely. The sources really emphasize this point, that instead of trying to fix our biases, which is kind of impossible, we need to learn to work with them. So for example, if you know you're someone who tends to panic when the market dips, maybe a more conservative approach. It's actually better for you in the long run, not just for your peace of mind, but also for your returns.
So it's less about finding the perfect strategy and more about finding the right strategy that's perfect for you, accepting yourself and your financial quirks.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that actually leads into another one of the big insights from your readings, which is this idea of saving like a pessimist, but investing like an optimist.
That sounds like a recipe for inner conflict. How do you balance those two?
Well, it's all about recognizing the role that each mindset plays. So optimism is what allows us to invest for the long term, because we believe in the power of compounding, the resilience of the market. But pessimism, that's what keeps us grounded and make sure that we're prepared if things go wrong.
So the pessimist in us builds the emergency fund and the optimist buys the index funds.
Exactly. It's like Morgan Housel says in the book. Having a big emergency fund isn't really about the actual interest that you earn. It's more about the feeling of security that it provides. It's that peace of mind that's worth its weight in gold, especially when times get tough.
It's interesting because so much of the traditional advice focuses on maximizing returns, but he's saying that the psychological return is just as important.
Yeah, and that comes through in a lot of the interviews you shared as well. There's this recurring theme about the importance of defining enough.
Ooh, that's a tough one, isn't it? It's like there's this constant pressure to achieve more, earn more, accumulate more. When is it ever enough?
Right, and Housel tells these really interesting stories in his book about people who were brilliant, at building wealth, but they had no concept of enough. And they ended up making these reckless decisions that led to their downfall.
That's where that one more year syndrome comes in. People delaying retirement, chasing these ever higher numbers.
Yeah.
Because they're just afraid to say this is enough.
It's a trap. It really is a trap a lot of us fall into. And it speaks to the power of our internal narratives about money. But we can come back to that in a little bit. For now, let's shift gears and talk about bubbles.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. You flagged this point from Housel. He argues that bubbles are about shortened timelines, not just high valuations. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Absolutely. So it's this fascinating psychological phenomena. Imagine a stock that starts rising rapidly. People pile in because they want to make a quick buck, right? Suddenly, everyone's focused on what's going to happen tomorrow, not 5 years from now. And that short-term focus, it creates this frenzy. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it pushes prices even higher, way beyond what's rationally justifiable.
And then, boom, the bubble burst.
Exactly. Because eventually, reality sets in, right? People realize the fundamentals don't support those crazy valuations, and the whole thing comes crashing down.
So how do we avoid getting caught up in that frenzy? How do we cultivate that long-term perspective when everyone around us is just trying to get rich quick?
That's where this concept of flexibility comes in. And Jeff Bezos actually provides a great example of this. Bezos said, it's impossible to imagine a future where Amazon customers don't want low prices and fast shipping. These are core human desires. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And that formed the bedrock of Amazon's strategy. It's a great example of identifying the constants, the things that don't change, amidst all the noise and hype.
So while everything around us is changing, there are certain things about human behavior that stay the same.
Precisely. And those constants, they can give us a kind of anchor
Yeah.
in this sea of uncertainty. But that doesn't mean being rigid. In fact, the sources you gave me, they really emphasize this idea of,
Yeah.
holding your opinions, even your strongest convictions, with an open hand.
Strong opinions, weakly held, right.
Exactly. Being willing to adjust course as new information comes in, even if it means admitting you were wrong.
Right. Cause clinging to those outdated beliefs, especially in finance, that can be costly. And that brings us to another concept that I saw coming up a lot in the sources, the margin of safety. I think I understand it on a basic level, like having an emergency fund, diversifying your portfolio. But I'm curious to hear how your experts view it.
They really emphasize that. A margin of safety isn't just about having extra cash. It's a broader philosophy, like a way of thinking about risk that goes beyond any one specific thing. It's about building in buffers, expecting the unexpected,
Yeah.
and making decisions that give you room to maneuver when things go wrong.
So being prepared for those tail risks that Dallas talks about.
Exactly. Those low probability but high impact events that we tend to underestimate. And Housel uses this powerful analogy. He compares a bond portfolio to an emergency fund, arguing that the real return is in the flexibility and peace of mind that it provides.
Yeah, I love that. It's not just the actual interest earned, but the psychological benefit of knowing you have that safety net.
Right. It's about avoiding those situations
Yeah.
where you're forced to sell investments
Yeah.
at the worst possible time,
Yeah.
just because you need the cash.
Like having to tap into your retirement savings during a market crash because you don't have an emergency fund.
Exactly. And those kinds of decisions made under pressure, they can have really bad long-term consequences.
Okay, so we've got our emergency fund, we're diversifying, we're being flexible, but I'm still thinking about those tail risks. Like, how do you plan for the truly unpredictable?
It's true.
Okay.
We can't predict every single thing that might happen,
Yeah.
but we can learn from those who have experienced them. And Housel has this really personal example. I mean, it's a little bit terrifying, but he talks about a skiing accident.
Yeah, that one really stuck with me. I wasn't expecting a story like that in a finance book.
I know, it's powerful though, right?
Yeah.
So Housel was skiing out of bounds with some friends, something they'd done a bunch of times before. It was a calculated risk. But this time, things went really wrong. He experienced firsthand the devastating consequences of a tail risk, something he never thought would happen to him.
And it totally changed his perspective, both in his life and how he thinks about investing.
Absolutely. It reminds us that these things that we tell ourselves will never happen to me.
Yeah.
They can happen. And it really underscores the importance of building in those margins of safety, acknowledging our own vulnerability, and making decisions that can withstand the unexpected.
It's like having insurance, not just for your car or your house, but for your whole financial life. And that insurance, it comes in a lot of forms. A good emergency fund, diversifying, even a flexible mindset.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a holistic view of risk, one that goes beyond just numbers and considers all the potential outcomes.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. You know, from all these mental biases to the power of stories, the importance of defining enough, embracing flexibility. But I keep coming back to this idea that understanding the psychology of money is a lifelong journey. It's not just about learning the rules, it's about developing a deep awareness of ourselves and how we relate to money.
You've hit the nail on the head, and the sources you gave me really emphasize that. The world changes, our circumstances change, and our understanding of ourselves changes too. So we need to keep revisiting our assumptions, challenging our beliefs, and adapting our strategies as needed.
So it's not about finding the perfect answer,
Yeah.
but about having that financial flexibility, that ability to change as things come up.
Exactly. The goal isn't to eliminate risk. That's impossible. It's about managing it intelligently, making decisions that align with our values, even when emotions are running high. And speaking of emotions, we should talk more about those internal narratives. We touched on them earlier. The stories we tell ourselves about money, they have a huge impact on our behavior and our outcomes.
Yes. I'm so curious about that. We've talked about hindsight bias, our aversion to loss. But what about those deeper narratives, those beliefs that we might not even realize we have?
That's where things get really interesting. They really do shape our actions and our decisions. It's powerful stuff.
So if we realize, these stories aren't helping us, what can we do about it? Can we actually rewrite these money scripts that are so ingrained in us?
I think it's definitely possible. It takes work, though. Conscious effort to identify them, challenge them, and ultimately reframe those beliefs that are holding us back. One thing the sources you gave me suggested was, What if, instead of trying to silence those stories completely, we focus on becoming better storytellers?
Okay, I like that. Tell me more about that.
So think about it this way. We can't just erase our past experiences, right? Or just magically delete those beliefs. They're part of who we are. But we can choose to focus on different aspects of those stories, highlighting the empowering elements and downplaying the limiting ones.
So instead of looking at the glass as half empty, we're choosing to see it as half full.
Exactly. If you're stuck in that scarcity mindset, always worried about not having enough, try shifting your focus to gratitude. What are you thankful for? What opportunities do you have to create more abundance? Even small changes in how you think can make a big difference.
So you're basically replacing that old negative script with a new positive one. You're not ignoring the past, but you're choosing to write a different future.
Exactly. And remember, rewriting those narratives doesn't mean pretending everything's perfect or ignoring the challenges. It's about approaching your finances with a sense of abundance and a belief in your ability to overcome those challenges.
That makes sense. It's about having a mindset that helps you reach your goals.
And that brings us back to the core of this whole deep dive, understanding the psychology of money. It's a journey. It's about peeling back the layers and understanding those hidden beliefs that drive our financial decisions.
Wow, this has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on money now. It's not just about numbers. It's a powerful force that affects our entire lives.
It really is. And the amazing thing is, when we understand that, we can make better decisions, build better habits,
Yeah.
and create a life that's more abundant and fulfilling.
So as we wrap up, what are some of the most important things for our listeners to remember?
I think the biggest one for me is self-awareness. We can't change what we don't acknowledge, right? So taking the time to understand our own biases, our emotional triggers, those hidden narratives, that's crucial.
I totally agree. And building on that, I think it's also important to work with our psychology, not against it. So finding strategies that work for us, not trying to fit into some mold that doesn't feel right.
Yeah, absolutely. Embrace your individuality.
Yeah.
Find a plan that feels authentic and sustainable.
Exactly. So to wrap up this deep dive into the psychology of money, I want to leave our listeners with this. We've talked about how our minds are wired for stories, how those stories affect our financial decisions, and how this is an ongoing journey of understanding. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to choose the narratives that empower you, the beliefs that support your goals, and take the actions that will lead you to financial well-being. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep refining your own money story. Because when you understand the psychology of money, you have the power to write your own financial destiny.